Radio. This is BBC Surrey.
Across Surrey and North East Hampshire, good morning. 6 o'clock on Thursday. It's the 19th of March. It's BBC Surrey Breakfast. James Cannon with Suzanne Bamborough.
Good morning. We start this hour looking at your top local and national stories.
Top story today, it centres around two little words causing big problems for people in West Surrey. What am I talking about? Flight paths.
It's been absolutely appalling.
That's what Lynn in Bagshot thought about the new trials being run by Heathrow. Residents were told they had stopped in November, only to seemingly continue into the new year. Here's what John in Lightwater said.
An awful state of affairs.
Well, now it seems that the residents who said the trials were going and continuing may have actually been right. Helen Hansen-Hjul is from Windlesham. Here's what she said at the time.
Since we last met, the trials were publicly announced as ending on November the 12th, which they did for a short while, but then they've gradually increased again, and they're now back to far more than we had before.
Well, now NATS, the main air navigation service provider, has apologised to Heathrow Airport for not highlighting an operational change to air traffic control. They have said that it affected some of the same communities that were affected by the airspace trials, which ended in November. Now, Heathrow say it's resulted in more concentration of aircraft activity over some areas, but a reduction in other areas. Now, for places like Windlesham, Lightwater and Bagshot, they say the number of aircraft actually has reduced, but places like Virginia Water have seen an increase. Let's cross now to our reporter Adrian Harms. He is with Helen Hansen-Hjul in Windlesham. Morning, Adrian.
Yes, good morning to you, Suzanne. Yes, it's the third time we've been back to Windlesham. It's the third time that we followed this story. And guess what? As I've been standing here for the last half hour or so, all I've heard is the continual drone of aircraft making their way across Windlesham. And it seems almost over the top of Helen's house. Now, Helen, you're with me this morning. Helen's actually got, I can only describe it as a dossier, really, a file that she's built up since this has been going on. Helen, what's the latest?
The latest is that the flights are back to worse than pre-trial in some cases. Yes, we get a bit of respite, but they are loud, they're low, and they are disturbing us, no matter what Heathrow say. The flight paths have definitely changed.
You said to me that yesterday was particularly bad. What was bad yesterday, Helen?
Oh, just the loudness. They started before 6 o'clock, so, again, woken up, and they just didn't stop until about 7, 8 o'clock. And then during the day we were getting them again loud. We did have little bits of respite, but it's still not the peaceful skies we once knew.
And just for perhaps people who haven't followed this story, just give us an idea and a feel for the effect this has had, not just on you, but other people around this area.
It's literally driving some people crazy. The noise is just so bad at times. And it obviously impacts sleep. Sleep deprivation impacts your work. Work obviously impacts your performance for your employer. And children at school, it affects their work. It's just not an acceptable situation.
So in terms of this statement from Heathrow, what's your take on that statement, and also what the National Air Traffic Service are saying?
I find it hard to believe that Heathrow, as a shareholder in NATS, and the airlines are unaware of what happened here. And I'm also slightly suspicious of why the CAA have not been involved in this, because NATS, as I understand it, don't actually set the routes. The CAA set them, and the pilots then stick to those routes, which NATS guide them through. So something is missing here in the argument.
Oh, and where does this story go from here, Helen?
Well, I would like to see an explanation, because we still haven't been given one, why these flight paths have changed over us. And is this a trial, even though they tell us no, it's not a trial? Also, if they have, as they say, stopped the flights because of safety on their previous routes, what was unsafe about them, and why are these any safer?
As an aeroplane right on cue makes its way over the top of us, what would you like to see? What would people living around here like to see? What would you like to know? What can, how can we get to the bottom of this story?
We would like to understand what is actually going on here with the flight paths, with the aircraft. Is this to check out new routes for the third runway, or Is this to do with safety? Tell us why you feel it necessary to change these flight paths, and then tell us they are not flight paths.
Final question. You mentioned their third runway. The general election is due. A decision on airport expansion is due after the general election. What are your thoughts about that?
That all the MPs have been suspiciously quiet on this. They don't seem to want to show their cards about the third runway before the election. And nobody is really, apart from Zach Goldsmith, coming out in any real opposition to the airport. Surrey County Council, although they say they oppose Heathrow, we're hearing nothing from them. There have been forums, community forums, which local Surrey Heath councillors have been invited to, yet nobody attended. The only people who attended was a representative from Lightwater, a resident herself, because no one from Surrey Heath Borough Council attended.
Well, Helen, thanks for joining us this morning. So, James and Suzanne, you heard an aircraft making its way across as we were talking here. The plot seems to thicken, but as Helen was saying, and in Helen's words, it's driving people crazy.
OK, Harm. So, when I lived in Windlesham, I never really noticed the planes. The only ones that we would wander out in the garden and look at was when Concorde would take off. And that was sort of always an attraction. Now, our main story, though, today centres around two little words causing big problems for people in West Surrey. What am I talking about? Flight paths.
I started to notice it in late April, and it's been absolutely appalling.
That's what Lynn in Bagshot thought about the new trials being run by Heathrow. Residents were told they'd actually been stopped back in November, only to seemingly continue in the new year. Here's what Helen Hansen-Hjul in Windlesham told us last month.
Since we last met, the trials were publicly announced as ending on November the 12th, which they did for a short while, but then they've gradually increased again, and they're now back to far more than we had before.
We'll have more from Helen in a moment, but she wasn't the only one feeling the impact of the trials. John got in touch from Lightwater.
I agree completely with Helen. We in Lightwater couldn't hear aircraft noise prior to the trial. The trial was inflicted upon us with no prior consultation, and now the menace that is Heathrow is fobbing us off, saying you just didn't notice it before the trial.
So the authorities say the trials were off, residents said they were on, and now it seems residents may have been right. Yes, that's because NATS, the main air navigation service provider in the United Kingdom, has apologised to Heathrow for not highlighting a change to air traffic control and have said this affected some of the same communities that were affected by the airport's airspace trials, which ended last November. We're going to speak to Nats in just a moment. First, though, let's go back to our reporter, Adrian Harms. He's in Windlesham for us this morning. Morning, Adrian.
Yes, hi Suzanne, and sort of back in Windlesham really, this is the third time we've been back to the village reporting on aircraft noise. It's not just the village of Windlesham we've been to Lightwater, which is just down the road, and Bagshot, which is very close by as well. And people here complaining and saying that the problem of aircraft noise is simply getting worse. It isn't going away. We heard earlier from Helen Hansen-Hjul, and this is what she told me earlier on this morning.
The latest is that the flights are back to worse than pre-trial in some cases. Yes, we get a bit of respite, but they are loud, they're low, and they are disturbing us. No matter what Heathrow say, the flight paths have definitely changed.
Well, we're joined now by Juliet Kennedy, NATS Operations Manager at the Control Centre in Sonic. Good morning to you, Juliet.
Good morning.
How did this happen?
Well, the trials that Heathrow ran, which we were jointly running with them, actually, it was Heathrow and NATS trials, were specifically about aircraft departing from the airport and what happened to them until they got to 4,000 feet. The bit of the procedure which you're referring to this morning, which we had changed, is different to that. It's much higher and further out from the airport. So Heathrow Airport were actually correct in telling residents that the trials had stopped. They did indeed stop in November. The reason we've apologised to Heathrow is because we made a change, as I say, higher up and further out.
How much higher? How much further?
Well, it's further out to the west than Windlesham and Lightwater. It's out near Compton, and it's about 8,000 feet and above.
The thing is, the residents would say, hang on, we are still getting the things over our house at exactly as it was before. So are they lying?
No, they're not at all. If I just explain the change that we made, What happens at the moment with the aircraft that depart from the airport is that they follow a very prescribed route until they get to 4,000 feet. What we have to control the traffic and to manage the arriving traffic and the departing traffic at Heathrow safely is an area of airspace which is established around Heathrow, which we're allowed to use to put aircraft pretty much where we need to, so that we can manage to descend the arriving traffic safely below the departing traffic, which is climbing. So we need to deconflict the arriving from the departing. And we have an area of airspace within which we're allowed to do that. So that's what we're doing. All we've done in this case, and it actually only affects about 6% of the departing traffic, of the total traffic from Heathrow, because it's one departure route and it's only on easterlies. So it's the Compton route off the easterly runway, which is about 6% of total departures. And what we've done is, much further up from 4,000 feet, we've made a change out to the west near Compton, which is at 8,000 feet and above. And it's to help us manage to separate the arriving traffic from the departing traffic safely.
So can Nats just do what you want?
We have airspace within which, yes, we can do what we want. We have airspace which is already established and designed for us to control traffic safely within. And that's our aim, really, is just to control the traffic as safely as we can and with as little impact as we can to the local residents. We do work really hard, actually, on reducing noise. So one of the reasons behind this change is that it helps us to be more environmentally efficient. So what we try to do is we try to continuously climb departing traffic and continuously descend arriving traffic, because if aircraft is levelling off frequently, it causes more noise. If they can make a continuous climb, it's less noisy for the local residents.
The thing is, I used to live in Windlesham, and I really, apart from Concorde going over, which used to be at 11 and at 4 in the afternoon, you would never notice the planes, but now, if you're there, you do.
Well, and I don't. The other thing I should probably point out actually is that the controllers don't see the local sort of map on the radar. They don't have towns and villages marked. So what they're trying to do is simply to safely separate the aeroplanes within the airspace that they are allowed to do that, and that's an important point. So. When you're designing new airspace or new routes, then you need to, obviously, to consult and you need to get approval from the regulator before you can do anything. What we were doing here was simply operating within the airspace we already have in a slightly different fashion to more safely separate arriving and departing traffic.
Would another runway make it worse?
Well, I think another runway would probably mean that there would be more traffic.
Right, okay. Good talking to you. Thank you. Operations Manager at the Control Centre in Swanwick. That's Juliet Kennedy from NATS, which basically operate the airspace.
Listening to all of that is aviation expert and journalist Julian Bray. Morning, Julian.
Good morning.
What do you make of all of this?
Well, let me put it like this. Before the changes, it was a 13-mile length of airspace, 13 miles, 21 kilometres. They've now reduced it to 7 miles, 11 kilometres. So your departing aircraft are taking off at a very steep angle in order to get to the required height, which means, of course, they've got to put extra power on the takeoff. So therefore, for a lesser number of people, there'll be more noise, but over the wider airspace, there is less noise. So it's one of these percentage things. So, in fact, what she says is slightly disingenuous, because I think she really ought to have a look at the Airport Commission report, which goes into all the whys and wherefores of departures and takeoffs. And unfortunately, if you do live in these areas where you've got very expensive houses, you're going to have an increasing amount of aircraft noise, specifically in Virginia Water, Ascot, Binfield and parts of Bracknell.
I guess the thing is, though, Julian, Juliet said that they can pretty much do what they want in a certain space.
Well, they can within bounds, because governments will still come in and they will negotiate various areas the things that they can do. What they're trying to do, imagine a flock of sheep, and you've got to get these sheep through a narrow gateway. That is what's happening at the moment. So they all get compressed into this narrow gateway, and then on they go to the next stage. So you've got this concentration of aircraft, and you've got arriving aircraft above the departing aircraft. So obviously you've got to have some separation there. It's all about levels, because before they previously kept them about longer at 6,000 feet. Now they can get away more quickly, and there's no conflict with arriving aircraft. So departing aircraft can get away, they can get up to the required level very quickly. But unfortunately, there's a greater degree of noise and discomfort because, in fact, you'll be sitting in your aircraft and you're wondering how on earth it's going up at that particular rate. But new aircraft can do that. So there are changes for everybody. It's not just the residents.
Julian, thank you so much. Julian Bray, their aviation expert and journalist. If you've been affected by the aircraft noise, we'd love to hear from you this morning.
Do get in touch. Surrey Breakfast at bbc.co.uk.